For the latest on the NAFTA negotiations, Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland joins me now. Thank you so much for being here today.
It is great to be with you, Mercedes, and congratulations on the launch of your show.
Thank you so much. So we've been staking out the United States Trade Representative's office.
I noticed.
You might have seen us out there a few times. And today, one of Trump's senior trade advisors, Larry Kudlow, came out and said, there's one thing standing in the way of the NAFTA deal, and it's MILK. Is there any flexibility here on dairy?
Well, since you have been staking out the negotiations outside USTR, you know, Mercedes, that at the beginning of last week, when this very intensive round of negotiations began, Ambassador Lighthizer and I, the USTR, agreed that we would not be negotiating in public. We would keep the negotiations to the negotiating table. And that agreement has really helped us to maintain a professional atmosphere around the negotiating table, an atmosphere of real goodwill and a real effort to work together to achieve a landing zone. So I'm going to stick to that. And what I will say about Larry, whom I know well from my days as a journalist, is he's not at the negotiating table.
Let me ask you a bit of a different way for something that's not in the room then. In previous trade agreements like CETA or the TPP, previous Canadian government said, okay, we'll crack the dairy market a little bit and supply management is still intact. Could something like that be an option where you wouldn't get rid of supply management, but you might give Donald Trump the win he's looking for?
So Canada, absolutely. We have now been doing this for more than a year. And Ambassador Lighthizer and I sometimes joke that we could trade seats and sit in each other's chairs. We know each other's positions so well that we know each other's lines. We understand very well what the U.S. needs to get a deal. And I hope the U.S. understands very clearly what Canada needs. And I do think that a good deal for both countries, for all three countries, is absolutely possible. It's going to take flexibility on all sides.
If it comes down to it and you don't have a deal and Donald Trump follows through on his threat, which he was making again today on the tariff, saying it would be the economic ruination of Canada, is that a chance you're willing to take?
So, as we have said from the outset, as the Prime Minister has repeated this week, Canada wants a good deal, not just any deal. And I feel extremely confident in that position. And I know that that is the position of Canadians. We're going to get a deal, which is a good deal for Canada. And we are not going to, we're serious when we say no deal is better than a bad deal. And it's very important for us to be firm and clear in that position. And I have to say, Mercedes, I feel so much that that is the way the vast majority of Canadians look at it. Before I traveled to Washington on Tuesday, I received a bouquet of flowers at my constituency office, red and white flowers, and they were signed from a devout Canadian and urged me and us to stand strong. And to me, that was very meaningful. And it was funny, the sign-off. It was anonymous, but a devout Canadian. Like, who knew Canadianness was like a religion, that you could be a devout Canadian? But I think, Canadians, we don't wear our patriotism on our sleeve. But I think all of us know what a fantastic country we have, and I think we're really, really proud of our country. And we know we are so good at finding compromise. In some ways, you could say that is one of the Canadian national talents. At the same time, we believe in standing up for ourselves and in standing up for the national interest. And that is the philosophy, that is the approach that we are taking at the negotiating table.
Part of that national interest has been, when you talk to people behind the scenes, that they say, look, the Americans are testing us, they're probing. At the end of the day, they do want a deal. So I found it fascinating when last week we found out from Bob Woodward's book that one of the documents on Donald Trump's desk was apparently to announce the withdrawal from NAFTA, and he was prepared to sign it. It seems like he may not be completely bluffing, that he'd consider pulling out. Did that revelation concern you?
So I have always taken the president at his word. He is the president of the United States, and we need to respect his office. And I certainly do. Having said that, I very much believe that the U.S. would like a deal. So would Canada. We are negotiating in good faith. The mood, the atmosphere at the negotiating table is absolutely positive. And I think it's also important to remember, for us as Canadians, to remember trade, by definition, is not a one-way street. Of course, trade with the United States is important to Canada. Canada is important to the U.S. too. We are the largest market for the United States, larger than China, Japan, and the UK combined. We are important to the U.S., and I think Americans know it. And I also think a really important point is the trade between Canada and the United States is balanced and mutually beneficial. So it's that economic reality which, at the end of the day, I think needs to be the most important element, the most important driver when it comes to these negotiations. And for sure, there's a lot of drama and excitement around. But I think we need to always come back to remembering that this is a relationship that works.
Well, Canadians and Americans both like jobs, of course, like having them. But at the end of the day, it's not just the president who's going to decide on NAFTA. It's also Congress. How much has been going on behind the scenes in terms of quiet diplomacy there, trying to recruit people onto your side who might be able to balance out the president?
You know, Mercedes, I wouldn't put it in those terms at all. Canada understands that in the U.S. political system, the Congress has an essential voice when it comes to trade. And so it's our job to talk to Congress, to listen to Congress. When senators, congressmen, and women want to hear what the Canadian story is, want to learn more about their states or their district's relationship with Canada, it's important for us to be there and to talk to them about that. And that is something, you and I are sitting here in the Canadian Embassy, that is something which we have been really doing with a lot of commitment because it's our job. And I will say, I'm a member of Parliament, and when I speak to a congressman or woman or a senator, I find they are extremely well informed about the needs of their district or of their state. And it's at that more granular level that people in the United States really do appreciate the importance of their trade with Canada. And for any Americans who are watching, I'd like to say to them, and we appreciate the importance of the United States to us too.
Journalists are sensitive to deadlines. You were a journalist. There have been, it seems, an endless series of deadlines in the NAFTA negotiations, the most recent one blown past. How real is this upcoming deadline to get text to Congress by the end of the month? Is it really a drop-dead date?
I think that's really a question for the U.S. That's about the U.S. legislative process. When it comes to Canada, our focus from the outset and our focus today is getting a deal that works for Canada. Getting that deal, mindful of the need to have flexibility on both sides, mindful of the need to look for compromises that both sides can live with. And at the end of the day, always really mindful of our national interest. So that's what we're focused on.
At the end of the day, if you have to choose between dairy and auto, how do you make that decision?
So, as I've said, Mercedes, Ambassador Lighthizer and I agreed that we are not going to be negotiating in public, and I'm going to stick to that. And I'm going to stick to that because it's very important in these negotiations to have trust between the negotiators. And, I want to say to Canadians, it's very important for me to get the best possible outcome, and having that level of trust is essential. Now, when it comes to the shape of the deal, what I can say is we are looking for a deal which is balanced, and we're looking for a deal which is good for Canadians, which is good for Canadian workers, which is good for Canadian families, good for Canadian farmers. I grew up in the Peace Country. My dad is on his swather right now. I love rural Canada. I love Canadian farms, and that is definitely something that we have very much in mind.
Minister Freeland, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Great to talk to you, Mercedes, and thank you for coming here to Washington. And thank you and all the journalists who have been covering these talks, sweltering on the sidewalk outside USTR. No, the work of journalists is a really important part of good government and of our democracies. And these have been, I think, very difficult talks, intense, strenuous for our negotiators and also for our reporters. So thank you for making the trip.
Thank you.